Hello. This year's shortlists for the Indie Book Awards were announced recently, and if you don't know, this is a British literary award where the winners are chosen by independent booksellers. And as we all know, booksellers have great reading tastes, great reading recommendations, and those winners are going to be announced on June 20th, which is smack in the middle of Independent Bookshop Week here in the UK, which is a wonderful excuse to go out and buy some books. I mean, not that I need an excuse. I'm buying books all the time, but I love using it as a challenge to maybe visit a bookshop that I've not been to before, and I love following on social media of all the books that people are buying. So it's just a wonderful celebration of physical bookshops. Now, there are 4 different categories to these book awards, and normally I'd be focusing on the fiction category since I'm someone who primarily reads fiction, and I will discuss that category briefly towards the end. But actually, I've really enjoyed getting recommendations from nonfiction book awards recently, like the very first Women's Prize for Nonfiction. I mean, these are all excellent. And I made a whole separate video discussing this shortlist, so I'll link that below. But I'm going to focus on the nonfiction category for the Indie Book Awards, and these are the 6 books which have been shortlisted. So I'm going to go through and discuss each title because I think they all sound really fascinating. Starting with Katherine Rundell's The Golden Mole and Other Vanishing Treasures, where she discusses a number of different animals. I mean, some of them will be familiar to you, like crows and bears and wolves, but also some slightly more exotic animals, like the golden mole of the title. And the very first chapter is about my favorite animal of all time that I have a bit of an obsession with, and that is, let me just find it because there's really lovely illustrations that go along with this as well, but the wombat. And here's a little illustration of him, this lovely marsupial from down under, that are small burrowing bear-like creatures that are just so wonderful. And so each account of these animals gives a kind of history of them and humans' interactions with these animals over time, and some interesting biological facts about them, but also about how environmental changes are damaging the populations of these different animals. And so even some of the familiar animals, there are traits about them and things about them which I didn't know. And so this is so fascinating to read about. And the way that Katherine Rundell writes is just so beautiful and just flows along. So I'd actually read the entirety of this book aloud to my partner before we went to bed each night. I would read about a different animal to him before we went to sleep. So that was a really lovely thing to do. And also, yeah, this is just a gorgeous book in general. And yeah, like I said, has all these great illustrations that go along with it as well. Next are a couple books about people doing things which ideally I would like to do myself, but I know in reality they're things that I'm never gonna personally do. So first there is Finding Hildasay by Christian Lewis. And in this, the author, it's an account of a time when he spontaneously decided to walk around the entirety of the UK coastline. And so we follow his journey, the discoveries he makes along the way, but also how he's wrestling with different things about his life. And so it's this journey of self-discovery, which just sounds so beautiful. And so the Hildasay of the title is a remote, uninhabited island which he spends some time on and does some real soul searching on. So yeah, this sounds like a wonderful memoir. The Farmer's Wife by Helen Rebanks, and this is an account of the author's time living on a farm in the Lake District and teaching herself to cook there, and the different crops that she utilizes, and the challenges that they face as farmers. And also, speaking of the Women's Prize, the Women's Prize founder, Kate Moss, endorses this book where she says, "It's true, unflinching, powerful, and lyrical." Everything is Everything by Clive Myrie. This is another memoir by one of Britain's most prominent journalists and presenters, giving an account of his life and discussing a number of very pertinent issues, and how his own experience relates to the way that he approaches journalism and life in general. And it follows him from his beginnings as a child of the Windrush generation and how that has been such an influence on his life, but also how he was a very shy boy, but then grew up to be this very confident and outspoken journalist. So it sounds like a fascinating journey. The Future of Geography by Tim Marshall. And this is a look at how space is being colonized, how it's being explored and exploited, and which countries have a stake in it, who has the right to lay claim to areas of the moon or different planets or different parts of space. And this is really fascinating because I don't know the answers to these questions. And so, yeah, I think it'll be really interesting how it looks at this. And I'm just always interested in space in general. And finally, there is Divine Might, Goddesses in Greek Myths by Natalie Haynes. And this is looking at different goddesses and the stories behind them, like Aphrodite and Artemis and the Muses and the Furies. And I loved reading Natalie Haynes' novel A Thousand Ships, which was her retelling of a Greek myth. And so as an expert in this field, I think it'll be really interesting to get her perspective on these different goddesses' histories. And recently I have loved watching this program called The Great Greek Myths, which is on Prime, and it gives these accounts of different Greek mythology with lots of interesting animation to go along with it and like bring it all alive. And so, yeah, it'll be wonderful to dive into a bit more of these stories. So those are the books shortlisted for nonfiction. Now, in the fiction category, I have read a few of these novels. So there's Babel by R.F. Kuang, which is quite entertaining and an intriguing way of discussing colonialism in a fantasy adventure story. There's also Really Good Actually by Monica Hesse, which also is very entertaining and funny, while also looking at some of the like darker aspects and ways of adulting, as it's called. But I think my favorite novel on this fiction shortlist is Old God's Time by Sebastian Barry, whose writing is just sublime. I mean, his turn of phrase and the way that he incorporates some humor and some really intriguing characters into a largely quite like dark and disturbing story about a retired police officer who's drawn back into investigating this old case which has been brought up again, and looking at his own troubled past and family history and his own sense of morality. I think it is just excellent. So I'd highly recommend reading that as well. But I'd love to know if you've read any of the books listed in these different categories and what you think about them, or if you're interested in reading any of them now. And I'm going to be very intrigued to see which books win on June 20th and go out to some bookshops and do some book shopping. So thank you for watching me discuss these books and this prize list, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.